Ahoy, everyone. This is David Perry with my continuing series of interviews with friends, colleagues, talking about how we get from the great pause into the great return. And today, I'm delighted to have a longtime colleague and friend, Jodi Schwartz, Executive Director of LYRIC, on the show, talking about how LYRIC helps LGBTQ youth. Jodi, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, David.
So how long have you been involved with LYRIC, and what was it that drew you to it?
Sure. Well, I'm about to celebrate my 15th anniversary with the organization. It's been an amazing journey. And what drew me is I've always done social justice work since I was 17. I'm 57 now, so it's been a road. And I had worked on a number of issues that were kind of national in scope. And I think at that time, back in the early 2000s, you know, a little bit similar to now, there was kind of lots going on in the world. And I felt like I really wanted to step in and make an impact more locally, and also something that was personal. I'm a queer woman myself. Been married since we were allowed to be married, but with my partner for over 20 years. And I wanted to step into a more personal space in the social justice work that I was doing.
So having lived in San Francisco for 36 years now, I've been well aware of LYRIC for a long time, passed the LYRIC house many times on Collingwood Street. But I think even a lot of San Franciscans don't understand the depth of the program that LYRIC puts on. Talk to us about the mission of LYRIC, how it started, and actually what the acronym means.
Sure. So I'll start with that. LYRIC is the Lavender Youth Recreation and Information Center, and lavender is very much, you know, a kind of culture and historical term. Lavender, kind of celebrating who we are as LGBTQ plus people. And we're really known more as LYRIC now. We've kind of almost rebranded ourselves as LYRIC Center for LGBTQQ Youth, because we used to have a talk line, which we don't have anymore. We actually gave that to another organization that runs a national talk line. And while we definitely do things that are recreational, the early days, we were part of the Gay and Lesbian Softball League. You know, it was much more kind of that kind of an organization. And so a lot of our evolution, like many things at LYRIC, is very reflective of what youth are prioritizing. So historically, LYRIC came about because a group of young people, a group of queer and trans young people said, we need a physical center. We need a place in the community where we feel safe, where we feel celebrated. And what's great about LYRIC's history is that it's a lot about youth adult partnership, a lot about how we stand. Others have kind of stood in allyship with LGBT young people, as well as how we stand in allyship with other communities like the Black Lives Matter movement today. So that's always been a part, and leadership is really the cornerstone of LYRIC as well. So LYRIC, you know, young people bring their ideas, what are they facing, their viewpoints of the world, and saying, what do we want LYRIC to be? So the evolution of what we have become as an organization is very reflective of what young people need. So they need jobs, they need to be paid. So we hire about 100 young people a year into a whole continuum. Since the early 90s, we've had internships, but now it's robust. We have our Sequoia Leadership Institute, which is kind of our core internships for like high school age students. Out of that grew Undocu Workforce, because we were having so many LGBT young people who were also undocumented and kind of coming out as queer, coming out as trans, coming out as undocumented, has a very similar experience. And so there was a lot of synergy in that. And then we found that there wasn't a lot of career development opportunities for undocumented young people at all generally. And so that's where we stepped into allyship with that community. And so that program is both queer and trans as well as allied young people. We have a whole new TAY, transition age youth, 18 to 24-year-old. We have a whole new continuum of leadership supports for that program. Growing out of kind of a fellowship idea, now we have a community leadership program that leads into an artistic resistance program. And what's exciting, which is very new for LYRIC, is we now have a mentorship program where young people can be matched together with folks in community who want to be there for LGBT young people. And, you know, if say David, you know, there's a young person interested in media and communications, you know, they could look to someone like you who has just so much experience and learn about what it's like to be part of the LGBT community in that field. And so that's, our young people love that. It's been a great success. We have community building groups that are a little bit more informal. We're now in the schools, so we're in 8 middle schools and 12 high schools. We have a great partnership with the San Francisco Unified School District. We're at community clinics. So Dimensions is a clinic that's run by the Department of Public Health in partnership with LYRIC, but we're at a lot of the other youth clinics around the city as well. So lots going on.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's like Kamala Harris said the other day during her acceptance speech. It's a lot.
It's a lot.
I think it's going to be one of her more famous quotes. It's a lot. Now, you've been with the organization now 15 years, but what was the genesis of LYRIC and who?
Sure. So the kind of mythology around LYRIC is 2 young women, Beth Tepper and Donna Asawa, came together along with the youth of the community to start this idea of how is San Francisco kind of the mecca of the gay world? How are we as a community going to step up for young people? And the first activity that the youth wanted to have, of course, was a dance. Let's celebrate, let's have fun, let's get together. And that's actually something we still do, not at the moment, although who knows, we might have a Zoom dance soon. Yeah, it started with a dance. And like I said, there were many, many adults who were part of the organization in early days, and also organizations. So before LYRIC was its own nonprofit, we were first part of Operation Concern and 18th Street Services. Neither of those organizations exist anymore. And then later we were a project of the Women's Building. And then in the early 90s, we became our own nonprofit. And we also got our facility on Collingwood, again, with lots of support from many adults. I've been having some great conversations recently with Roberta Achtenberg, who was on the Board of Supervisors. Pam David was the head of the Mayor's Office of Community Development at the time, and many others who kind of came together to say, yes, this is a priority. We need to have a space for youth. And I would say even today, the importance of having a safe space for youth, with youth really determining what the programming is looking like and being part of crafting what the curriculum is, and you know, what activities we should be doing, what projects we should be working on, still very much a part of the organization today.
And how does LYRIC define youth?
Sure. So we work with youth 24 and under. So we probably 10 is the youngest age we tend to work with. But like I said, for our youngest youth, oftentimes that's more place-based. So maybe a young person who's being seen in one of the community clinics, and certainly our middle school activities. And then in the summertime, we do bring our middle school students to LYRIC to create that bridge between school years to a program that they named called Camp Sparkle. And then our oldest youth up to 24, so 18 to 24, or even 16 to 24 is considered transition age youth. And it's a whole kind of field and movement to help young people who may not have had what I certainly had, which was supportive, many supportive adults in my life to support me in my transition into adulthood. A lot of the young people we work with who are mostly low income, predominantly youth of color, a lot of system engagement, high levels of homelessness, aren't surrounded by a community of support and adults.
You know, it's difficult enough being young, queer, not knowing if you're going to be supported at home or at school without the worst pandemic in 102 years. I mean, we thought the Bush administration was a challenge. The Trump administration was already a challenge. And now we have this pandemic. How has this strangest of years, as I call it, impacted the youth that you serve, but also how has it impacted LYRIC's ability to serve those youth?
Sure. Well, I have to just say how appreciative and how amazing our staff are. We literally, you know, there was a number of programs happening in the moment when the city started to move into shelter in place, and we didn't miss one day of programming. The staff figured out how to reorganize everything and moved everything to virtual and transitioned all the curriculum to a virtual platform. Just, you know, so appreciative to the amazing staff that LYRIC has. Some of the things were expected, and some of the things were unexpected. So I think we knew, I mean, like I've been saying and talking about the connection that the young people have to LYRIC as a community, as a second home, is really deep. And so we anticipated that disconnection from actually being able to come together as in community and be with one another and laugh, and to get food. We have, you know, we work with the SF food bank to have food at LYRIC. So there's young people who come by every day to get a bag of food, to get transportation tokens from us, to use the bathroom. I mean, just the real basics. And that is not happening anymore. So we knew those things. But then as we started to get into our different programs, things that many communities are struggling with around tech access. Do they have a computer? How's their internet stability? So that's one of the things we're actually currently working on right now, is where there are young people and families that don't have connectivity. We're helping with that. Food security, also something we kind of know about from other communities. So one of our staff has a friend who delivers food boxes. So we've partnered with that company who delivers food boxes with Turnout, the volunteer, LGBT volunteer group. And we've brought those two together. So we're getting food to some of our young people who have food insecurity. But some of the other things we weren't as prepared for. So
Right.
You take a young person who's got a tense relationship with their family about their identity, and they've been navigating it, and it's challenging, but they're getting support and they're coming to LYRIC, and it's okay, not great. But then all of a sudden you tell that young person they've got to spend 24/7 in that space, that they can't go anywhere else, then those tensions really ratcheted up. So some months back, we actually went to San Francisco Foundation and Horizons Foundation, and both of those foundations came through for us to get money specifically for young people who we identified as experiencing emotional abuse in their homes. We're one of the cities, we work as one of the city's access points for youth experiencing homelessness, but the current definition of homelessness includes experiences of violence, but physical and sexual violence, but not emotional violence. So that's something that we've actually been really pushing the city to recognize the importance of emotional violence as something that can lead to homelessness. And so we have gotten special funds to help about 10 young people who were identified as being in shelter in place and needed to have the opportunity to move out. So we've been working with those young people. Another thing that was an eye-opener was this experience, right? I'm looking at you, I'm looking at myself, right? On this Zoom platform. When you are in a community space with others, you're not usually looking at yourself, right? I'm looking at you. I'm listening to you. I'm seeing who you are and how you're presenting, but I'm not seeing myself. So if I'm a trans young person who's beginning to explore and come, be in relationship with myself, I have an idea of what I look like and I have an idea of what I sound like. And then I actually see what I look like and sound like, and those things don't necessarily match. And that can be really disconcerting and challenging. And so that's been something that we have been in conversation and supporting young people about how they can be in these spaces and still retain a sense of who they are and still be able to be in community. Or a young person who isn't out to their family, all of a sudden, all of their community connection is via this platform. I'm in a house, my wife's down the hall. Oops, what? Sorry.
The glory of live Zoom.
She's listening to this conversation, right? I'm talking all about queer and trans this and gay this, right? So if I'm in a household where I'm not out, that's going to be challenging. And so learning how to have young people participate in programming using the chat instead, and making sure that the folks who are facilitating the space are honoring the words that are spoken equally to the words that are being written down, and being creative about that.
That's fascinating. Since what I call the worst Friday the 13th in my memory, Friday, March 13th this year, which for me is when it kind of got real, that infamous speech by President Trump, to just now, I have never had that thought before. The idea of what it must mean to someone who's not used to seeing themselves or uncomfortable with seeing themselves, especially a young person who's dealing with all kinds of identity issues, what that must be like. For some of them, it must be a bit traumatic.
Yeah. And so we want to be able to make sure that we're creating spaces. And again, I mean, at first it was a little bit like, okay, how are we going to do this? But at the moment that we transitioned into shelter in place, we actually had 2 active cohorts of interns happening at that moment. So it was a little bit like, okay, how are we going to get our footing? We had some young people who were just really overwhelmed and just were having a hard time engaging, or were having tech issues. But now that we've actually just completed yet another cycle, and we have the highest rate of engagement that we've ever had, not just in the numbers of youth who are staying part of the group, but also in, we set kind of goals based on youth development, where we know to really get the most out of this program, a young person needs to do this percentage of hours to really get the full impact. So we want, we're always looking at, how do we achieve the greatest impact with our young people in a positive way? We're also getting high engaged, they're not only all staying, but they're all staying a lot. And they're doing, and in part just, again, because the staff are being super innovative and creative and listening and being in conversation with young people about kind of what they need.
Fascinating. In our last few moments, talk to me about what's next for LYRIC and how COVID has changed what that one next was going to be, because I know you have some big plans in the works.
Yeah. So, Lyric has grown. Our budget has grown by 90% over the last 3 years. And that has resulted in Lyric hiring almost twice the number of staff that we had for many of the years that we had been, that I've been with Lyric. The staff hovered about, around, 15 staff, and now we're over 30 staff. And our depth of programming has also gotten much deeper, particularly across the age spectrum. So we have different programs happening at different times with different age groups. So we really need space. And now, given the pandemic and what I expect will be kind of new ways of being back together again, social distancing. I mean, right now we're in an old house with smallish rooms. We've broken through some walls, but we cram a lot of young people into a single space, and that's just not going to be possible anymore. I believe it's just not going to be healthy and safe. So Lyric is actually stepping into a capital project to renovate, thankfully, and again, thank you to the really community as a whole that supported Lyric to own our facility. We're literally moments away from paying down our original mortgage. So we'll own the facility outright. But we are working on a project to expand the usable space at our property by about 44% by expanding the first floor into kind of an open space that used to be used for a driveway. We have a big deck area that we'll redo, as well as a back building, a rear annex that we're converting. So we're in that process with planning, and we're in that process with the community to raise the funds that we need to make that happen. And, I think there's definitely a question in people's mind, like, wow, a capital project in the midst of all of this, is this really what we should be putting our resources to? And I would say, yes, we have to meet basic needs for sure. And Lyric is part of that response, both within Lyric and as part of several coalitions that are working. We're part of a coalition working around students in schools and families, and we're part of a LGBT relief coalition to make sure our communities are getting what they need right now. But this will end. And we will need to come back together. And the young people that Lyric has worked with for now over 3 decades will desperately need to be back with one another, as Lyric's mission states, building community, right, and inspiring social change. We will need to come back together, and we will need to heal. These young people who've been separated from each other, sequestered, experiencing not only the pandemic, but also this kind of moment in time of Black Lives Matter and what's happening about state-sanctioned violence against particularly Black people, but many people of color. They've been experiencing all of this from their homes, being disconnected from their peers and disconnected from the people who say we love you who you are, and you belong to us and you are welcome. Like, that just experience has not been a part of many of their lives. And so we're gonna need to have a space that will be able to welcome them back to heal. And so I actually feel like it's the perfect time for us to be rethinking our community spaces and making an investment in those spaces to make sure that they're safe. So we have more space. We'll be putting in new air circulation systems as well, that will have a backyard that's more easily usable. And also we have a high number of youth with disabilities. And so we want to make sure our space is fully accessible to the whole community of youth that Lyric is there to serve.
Well, it literally is an investment in the future. My last question for you, since you've been there 15 years, I'm sure that there are people, young people, that came in at the beginning of the program and now are adults. Any stories or anecdotes about someone who was a young person at LYRIC taking part in programs that came back as an adult to participate and help?
Yeah, actually, there's two alumni who've joined working with us on the capital campaign that, I'm sure they would be happy to be claimed by LYRIC. So Claire Farley, who's currently the director of the Office of Trans Initiatives for the city and for Mayor Breed, is a former intern with LYRIC when I was actually an intern around the time that I first joined, and then became a board member also later. And now, is Claire and I work on a lot of projects together. We work very closely with that office. And then another person, Tracy Zhu, who's born and raised in the Bayview with her family, is now working for the PUC around community engagement initiatives, also became a board member, is done a lot of work around environmental justice, helped LYRIC craft our environmental justice curriculum that is still in place today. And both of them are just amazing leaders, and their stories are really exemplify what we want, which is, folks of color, trans folks being supported in their leadership and going on in their life path and doing amazing things, and being those models, being those examples for our young people to say, this is a future you can have, and we will support you to get you there.
Thank you, Jodi Schwartz. Congratulations to you and LYRIC for everything you continue to do for LGBTQ plus youth. Congratulations on the expansion. We look forward to seeing it and look forward to seeing people back in that space as it was intended for. We've been speaking with Jodi Schwartz, Executive Director of LYRIC. Thank you so much, Jodi. Ahoy.
Thank you, David.